Hello, it's Rafael Gutierrez again, and today I'm going to talk about the possibility of one of these legends that we hear about, now the reason I'm actually focusing on this one in particular is because legend actually gives us actually specific signs and symptoms of what happened, and specific locations. Now I cannot remember the entire story. I was talking to someone at a coffee shop, and I didn't have anything to write it down, but I remembered the fine points. Now the points were this. There was supposedly a kung fu master who got assaulted by someone, and what they did is, according to the person who saw it, he just hit on the right side of the ribs. And supposedly this criminal ended up being in a lot of pain, and a couple minutes later started getting dizzy. And he went home, and apparently when he went home, a lot of people were talked about the symptoms that he had, and he started getting paler and paler, wasn't able to move as much, became lethargic, and eventually died. This did take about a week, supposedly, and the thing that I saw with this specific legend, and if anyone knows what the name of the person who was involved in, please write it in the bottom, because I can't remember to save myself. But the reason I found this really interesting is it gave specific symptoms of the weakness, fatigue, the strike where he was hit, the severe pain, how he had, actually I forgot to mention, he had abdominal pain as well. And all this together gives us something that we actually see in football injury. Can happen in football. And that is when someone gets hit on the right side, more towards this area here, which is where the spleen is located. And when the spleen is hit, the spleen pretty much is a big bag of blood inside of you. And when the spleen is hit and slightly tears, sometimes with rest for a couple of weeks, people can recover. Sometimes the hit is so bad that what ends up happening is the person does end up having a rupture of the spleen, and that one actually goes pretty quick, so we wouldn't actually have any delayed signs. But sometimes people have a tear in the spleen, and the tear just starts bleeding. And again, like I said, with red rest, sometimes it can heal, but sometimes it continues to bleed in the abdominal cavity. The bleeding gets worse, and eventually the person dies. Now, the thing that ends up happening is the person becomes paler because they lose blood. They're losing going into the abdominal cavity. You don't see the bleeding because it's all internal. So that's one of the signs. The other thing is a weakness, which again, this was actually mentioned. The other thing is there's a rapid heart rate as you try to get the blood to the brain, even though there's no blood to get there. And so eventually, some time people can die with this. It does happen. It is seen in modern medicine. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. Now, this week, there was an event that happened where someone took a knee to the head, right around this area, in MMA. And so next week, I will be trying to get the video to show you how the sinuses are here and how they actually can break easier than most places. It is one of the things that a lot of people tell you in self-defense. If someone is coming up, you can get the knee. And a lot of people say, well, it's never been used in MMA. Well, now it has, and you can see how the damage can occur. Truth is, these are professional fighters who know exactly how to throw a knee harder than most people. So, this was a severe case. You can't see how it happens, but I'll talk about that next week. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the video. About a legend where someone got hit here on the side and supposedly developed a weakness, fever, severe pale complexion, and eventually died a couple days later. And someone asked me if it was possible that someone could get hit on the right side of the ribs and end up having those problems, or if this was just another one of the magical ideas of the death touch. Now, for that, we really want to go inside the abdomen. A lot of people forget that without looking at what's inside, we can't really say. So what I am going to tell you is, I'm already going to tell you the organ that you're hitting here is a spleen. And by taking these organs off, well, first of all, you can see how you can see the spleen here. You have ribs, but ribs don't necessarily protect as well as people think. But here in the back, we do have the spleen, right here. And the spleen is pretty much a bag of blood. And if it does get torn, and it does happen in football injuries, it does happen in soccer sometimes, you can end up having a slight tear of the spleen. Now what that would do is it'd cause leaking of blood into the abdominal cavity, and a lot of times this is something that is recoverable with rest. You can't be moving too much. And so it can be recovered pretty easy. But if movement is occurring and the bleeding continues or the bleeding is too bad, you would end up having bleeding in the abdominal cavity, the internal bleeding, and would end up dying of shock. Now, what that would do is it actually give you an increased heart rate because you're losing blood. You're trying to beat faster to get it to other organs. It would make you dizzy because you're losing blood, and it would give you a paler complexion. So it seems like this is actually not just a regular story of, oh, someone hit someone and magically not killed them, but it's something that could have been this guy was hitting the spleen, could have hit the guy in the spleen, and that's what ended up causing the injuries that ended up being killing him. Now, hitting the spleen doesn't necessarily take a long time to cause death. A lot of times people will end up rupturing a spleen, and nowadays it's a medical emergency. They go in, take it out. But in the past, before surgeries, before we actually understood what was going on, a ruptured spleen would end up being pretty much instant death. Also, a lot of people will actually were trying to use it for a place to stab because you stab it, it bleeds out quick. So with that, I guess that answers the question. Yes, someone could get hit on the right side and end up dying from internal bleeding a few days later. Thank you.
Wow.